go then. Welcome to Three Poems and a Question, and our guest today is Roy McFarlane. Roy is a poet of the Black Country and Birmingham, although he has now defected to Brighton. I first met him when he was Birmingham Poet Laureate, which was 13 years ago. And since then, I've seen him continue to evolve and to experiment with his work. He's using not only poetry, but he's written short stories and plays. And he's exploring many themes, including hurt, healing, the Black community that he's long served as an activist and community worker, where he's helped disenfranchised people to combat harassment, racism, daily difficulties. His poetic voice then is strong, humane, full of a gentle masculinity and relationships between people in urban landscapes. As the current Canal Laureate, he's exploring the waterways in the context of that political and personal landscape. He has 3 books out from Nine Arches Press. The first 2 titles, Beginning with Your Last Breath and The Healing Next Time, convey that sense of both pain and hope. The third one, which was out in October, is called Living by Troubled Waters. And in this one, he's delving much deeper into issues of current and past enslavement, racial harassment, prejudice, all the kinds of difficulties that can happen to people living in Black bodies in a world coloured by what Anthony Owen calls white darkness. And I wanted to start by using a quote that I recently used from Kathleen Jamie. She says she doesn't like to be asked what she writes about because it's kind of impossible to answer. She prefers to say that she writes from something or towards something or out of something. And so before we hear your 3 poems, Roy, I wonder if you could tell us something about what you write out of or towards.
Well, first of all, thank you, Joe, for inviting me to the Poetic License. It's a pleasure to be on board. Also, I remember that first time when I saw you, when I was a young pup, 13 years ago, as Birmingham Poet Laureate. And I just want to say, as somebody just awarded, and then suddenly to meet you, and then you came over with such life and bounce, and like, Roy McFarlane, you're the Birmingham Poet Laureate. Well done. And I'm thinking, she knows me, and you gave me such wonderful advice, and we have been the best of friends from that day. So enough of that, right? The question. Yes.
Oh, I'm not sure there's quite enough of that. Keep going.
There's more.
Anyway, that question: where do you write from or towards?
Yeah. Well, I guess I'm writing from pain, from a voiceless place. I'm really, I guess, my journey over the last 20, 30 years working in communities that don't have voices. They're often marginalized. They're often on the edge, kind of thing. And we have these stories. The most important story is that we are human. And oftentimes that simple thing, I know it sounds weird, but we love, we cry, we have mothers and fathers, we have loss, we have all these pains, we have sorrows and hopes. And I just wanted to kind of be a witness to that, to bring those voices, because often those voices are dehumanized. They are become stereotyped. They're deviled, as it were, the darker side kind of thing. And I'm saying, no, we are the same as everyone else, requiring that hope, that love. And I guess the biggest thing I'm writing from is something that my mom showered me with. And not only me, but the community that would come through her door. I'm writing from a place of love, and I'm hoping that I am putting that across as much as it's radical, as much as I can speak against injustice. But I'm speaking in love, because I believe collectively we can find an answer and move forward.
That's really interesting. Collectively, that comes across very strongly in everything that you write. That idea that it's not I but we that are dealing with these things, and that we is a very large community, which
Absolutely.
goes beyond the community that you're immediately talking about, and to a wider range of people who can tackle these things. I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about what you think a good poem does, or what we're aiming to achieve in poetry, and in particular if there's any reading. Should we have a reading list? What would you point us towards that we might not have read?
Okay. Wow. Okay. Um, so what should a poem do? Well, I certainly believe a poem shouldn't tell. It should. It just should. It just should softly. Should tickle you. It should play with you. It should just get you to a place where you're going, ooh, and you need to, and then you go and look further, or ooh, that reminds me, God, the way that person said that, that's what I'm going through. And so I guess it evokes an emotion. I think poems evoke emotions. They they get us to come at something from a different angle, and then when it shines that light, it becomes something that hopefully you can walk away with, and you can go on a journey. I think the most important thing about a poem is that it has a life after it's come from the poet, and when it becomes in I don't want to say a property, but when it becomes something for the reader to hold, it can do anything it wants with that reader, and they can take that together and go on a journey. And I'm just hoping that not only one reading but several readings, because the more you read it, something new comes, something fresh comes, and hopefully that it causes a ripple. And I'll finish with that because I could go on, but I hope it causes a ripple in that pond of humanity. You know what I mean?
Yes, I do. I do know what you mean. And go on then, give us one or two titles that you think we should be reading now. What you're reading currently, or a title that's made a great impression on you in the past.
Okay, no, I'm gonna have to turn around because there are some poems here, right? I will. Where are you? Um, there's a Brighton poet by the name of John McCullough, and I'm not sure if this is his latest book, Panic Response.
John McCulloch, yes. Yeah.
Yeah, anything by John McCullough is absolutely awesome, right? Two more, right? Natalie Diaz, right? Anything by Natalie Diaz is amazing. It is beautiful. And finally, Mary Jean Chan. Is it Mary Jean Chan?
Yeah, Mary Jean Chan.
Just, oh, there's a subtleness in the way they put something forward. And yet it's layered, layered,
Yeah.
and layered. And they are just beautiful in the telling of the stories. There are many more I could tell you about, but I think those that have come to mind.
They're lovely choices.
Yomi Shode, as a
Yes.
person writing as a young black man, and writing his book called Mannerisms, and you can
Yes.
play on that word in so many ways.
Yes,
But
I've just read that, Yomi Shode, and yeah, I'll include links to all of those in the show notes as well, because that's a really good cross section of interesting new voices, all of them, some of them coming from a place of queerness, all of them coming from a place of outside the sort of the mainstream conversations, and informed and coloured by that's brilliant. Thank you so much. So we better get on and have three poems and a question. It does what it says on the tin. So we hear three poems from you, either your own or somebody else's. And then I ask you one question, which is chosen from questions from my subscribers in the Poetic License.
let's go on a journey with what inspired me. Who is the person that I think opened the door for me, and it was Langston Hughes. Um, the that he wrote lyrically, musically, and he wrote about my community, even though it was an African American community. Um, no, he wrote about the African diaspora. Yeah, and there was this one poem that no matter how many times I read it over and over again, it's just like a sermon
Mm.
enraptured in something like, I don't know, 12. I haven't counted how many lines, 10 or 12 lines. This one's called The Negro Speak of Rivers. I've known rivers. I've known rivers ancient as the world and older than the flow of human blood in human veins. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. I bathed in the Euphrates when dawns were young. I built my hut near the Congo and it lulled me to sleep. I looked upon the Nile and raised the pyramids above it. I heard the singing of the Mississippi when Abe Lincoln went down to New Orleans. And I've seen its muddy bosom turn all golden in the sunset. I've known rivers, ancient.
That's a classic show don't tell.
But the amazing thing he does is time as well. I mean, when you're going back to the pyramids, the time of the pyramids, you know, I bathed in the Euphrates when dawns were young.
Mm.
You know, that kind of biblical talking about the rivers that came out of Eden. Man, and then he brings it to the present day. And then he finishes off, my soul has grown deep like the rivers.
When did you first read that poem?
About 30 years ago. So I would say I've got into poetry about 20, 25 years ago. And I think in the 90s, when I was exploring my identity. So I was a nice middle class guy working in the computer department, the only black guy in the whole massive computer department of Wolverhampton. So that was an intriguing journey. Um, and I was coming to the end of that, and I was just saying, is this what life's about? And something in me was looking and searching, and so I was reading stuff from Martin Luther King. I was reading the stories of Malcolm X, and I was listening to all their messages. And then somebody put Langston Hughes in my hands, and I would have said that was the kind of the turning point. Well, the Martin Luther King and Malcolm X was already a turning point, but to see that poetry could be written like that and say so much was certainly a turning point in my life. And we could be, you know, funny, we can be artistic, we can be musical, but we are trying to capture something that mirrors for others.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. And I really want to emphasize as well that we may have made your work sound rather grim, and although it is from the huge global background that it is, there's so much warmth and humanity, and you characterize it as being full of love, and that is the very word I would have used for it. It's a spirit of embracing, I think, and hopefulness. So thank you for that Langston Hughes poem. What is your second poem?
Okay, so I'm starting to play around with writing. I'm feeling I'm not too bad, and I start to look at I think I was writing love poems, the kind of thing you do is love poems, and I was writing a few other things. And then I started to work with young men that were being disenfranchised, that were being excluded from school. And so we went on the journey with them. And from that, I was getting really radical, trying to write some really strong stuff, but it wasn't coming off. And a friend gave me Nikki Giovanni. And then I just ripped up everything that I'd written before and I had to start again. But Nikki Giovanni, again, just such an incredible individual in the sense she writes it without a hesitation. She writes it raw. She writes it and punches you between the eye. And then she will pick you up and say, okay, let's walk together, see how we can do things together, right? And she has this thing about love and mothers, and this is the one I'm going to read. And it's because only, but it called to me this morning, Nikki Giovanni, and this one's called The Mothers. The last time I was home to see my mother, we kissed, exchanged pleasantries and unpleasantries, pulled a warm, comforting silence around us, and read separate books. I remember the first time I consciously saw her. We were living in a 3-room apartment on Burns Avenue. Mommy always sat in the dark. I don't know how I knew that, but she did. That night I stumbled into the kitchen. Maybe because I've always been a night person, or perhaps because I had wet the bed. She was sitting on a chair. The room was bathed in moonlight, diffused through those thousands of panes. Landlords who rented to people with children were prone to put in windows. She may have been smoking, but maybe not. Her hair was 3/4 her height, which made me a strong believer in the Samson myth, and very black. I'm sure I just hung there by the door. I remember thinking, what a beautiful lady. She was very deliberately waiting, perhaps for my father to come home from his night job, or maybe for a dream that had promised to come back. Come here, she said. I'll teach you a poem. I see the moon sees me. God bless the moon, and God bless me. I taught it to my son, who recited it for her, just to say we must learn to bear the pleasures as we have borne the pains. Listen, when I say I've not read this for a while, and I'm looking through it, there's not many pages I've folded over. So this meant a lot to me. And then it made me think that when I read through my 3 volumes of collection, mom is always in there. There's always a writing about mom or mothers that grew me up whilst I was in the church, and the inspiration of these powerful women. And I'm thinking, there's a reason why that was folded,
Yeah.
and why that has, you know what I mean?
So let's go on to your third choice of poem, Roy McFarlane. What have you got for us?
The Heron poem keeps coming back to me, and I just thought, if this is going out to a wonderful audience and this is part of poetic license, I think this poem kind of sums up the tradition and where I'm coming from with Langston Hughes, and the political power of Nikki Giovanni. So this is the poem. To the heron who stood with me in the ruins of another black man's life, after Gwendolyn Brooks and Gil Scott Heron. To the heron long and lean, standing still on the corners where the waters bend. To the heron gracefully grey, poised at the water's edge. To the heron painted in a tapestry of reeds, waiting, waiting. I want to learn the art of waiting in these dreadful times, thick, engulfing, choking times. To the heron, long limbed, taking 1, 2 steps, stretching those wings like Michael Jordan to rise in brilliance. To all herons from the lineage of Bennu, he who came into being by himself. To all the herons left school real cool, to the herons lurking late in summertime, to the heron with the slow wing beat of a double bass on a jazz June evening, to the heron motionless, still, standing still, to Gil Scott Heron, whilst I'm here standing in the ruins of another black man's life, I am death, cried the vulture for the people of the light. Yet, here we stand on the muddy banks alive, longing, begging, pleading, wanting change. To all those gliding towards the sunset, beautiful is your name. Thank you.
I am so delighted that you chose that poem, because it's the one I had in mind and didn't dare ask you to read, because you had to make the choice. And it seems to me that that's a beautiful circuit around all the places that you've come from and that you're trying to address. It stands for so many things.
Well, I mean, as you say, about the way we develop, and certainly, like in the second book, I would never dare. I would say I'm a poet, a freeform poet, so I would never have touched the sonnet. And yet, it was something I thought I had to develop, had to look at the idea, know the rules, and then break the rules.
Who is it? Is it Paul Muldoon says, form is a straitjacket in the way that a straitjacket was a straitjacket for Houdini. that the point of it is your struggle within the form, your trouble to escape, your struggle to escape the form and transcend it, really.
I guess with the Heron poem, that was for me now a journey in looking at nature, looking at the world with me, because during COVID, you started to walk in your local park, and we didn't have much of a park in Tipton. I shouldn't say that because they got Victoria Park. That's all right. But there's a canal which is much more better. It'll just take you wherever. And if you just spend the next couple of hours, have a flask with you or whatever, just go where the canal takes you. And I think that was my first encounter with a heron. And no, it wasn't, because previous the year before, the wonderful Emma Pursehouse had gathered together about 10 poets of the region along the Tipton Canal. And while we were reading at different points of the canal, a heron came through the tunnel. And I am telling the width of the wing of this heron. This must be a fully pledged, proper sized heron. And the sound, woof, 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 stuck with me for about a year. And then for me now to meet another heron, and I'm in that place of COVID, and also the death of George Floyd. I'm in that place, and it's like this heron is now talking to me. It's okay, let's talk, and that's how the poem came to fruition. And it was an ode in response to George Floyd's death.
Yeah.
And it's just saying, look at all of this beauty around us, the coots, the canal, the riverbed, all these things, all these beautiful things. Isn't this something that all of us should be experiencing? And I wish that our community or the Black community or somebody who's in that moment of injustice would have the same opportunity as others to experience this. It's something like that. You have to buy the collection to read the first poem, then you can connect to the last poem, and then you understand.
Yes, we will. There will be in the show notes, and wherever you're seeing or listening to this, there will be a link directly to buy the book from Nine Archers, which of course is my publisher as well. And fabulous, supportive Jane Kamain. So the last part of 3 poems and a question is, you guessed it, the question.
The question.
And I always ask the members of the Poetic License what they would like to ask my poetry interviewee. But the one that I've chosen is from Palmer McEwen. And she says that she was brought up as a Roman Catholic and she wouldn't call herself that any longer, but she's very much aware that it influences and informs her writing. And so she wanted to know how your Christian faith has influenced or informed your own writing.
That's a beautiful and wonderful question. I think oftentimes I've said, if I start off with my mom, who at the age of 5 years old, if not younger, would be reading Psalms to me, and I would have to read the Psalms and remember the Psalms. And there's something poetic and lyrical in that kind of King James version kind of writing that you can't get out of your head. I've also told you about my journey with really digging deep into the sermons and of Martin Luther King, and it was, for me, that was a turning point as a Christian, that there was a really cry to me about social justice. And so I think, even though I've moved away from the institution, that's the spirit of the thing, and the belief of a greater being, and the need for us as a community to have a notion of love and spirituality. I think that continues and flows through my collection. I think I can't escape from that. As many as poets will bounce off Greek myth or old English just text and stories and myths, I'm always bouncing off the Bible, because that's what I know. I will challenge it as well. I think there are some onerous and some interesting things that go on in the Bible that we need to challenge or put a light on, and let's have a conversation about that. Whether that's about misogyny, homophobic, etc., etc. We need to shine a light on that and have that conversation. But I think there's something, again, for me, the 2 key things, and I hope that echoes from my collection, is the acknowledging the ones when Christ was asked what are the greatest commandments, and he spoke of love your neighbor as yourself and love God. And so for me, God is that. It could be Mother Nature, it could be anything. It's just acknowledging that something's greater than you, and most importantly, and I repeat time and time again, and I think that whatever collections will come forward after this, it'll be about loving my neighbor as myself. Whatever I want for myself, I want for my neighbor. So whether he's crossing the English Channel, trying to get away from all the shit that's going on in his country or whatever, you want the same thing for yourself. I can't understand, and I'm sorry if I'm going to go off edge here, that we are a country of migration. We are blessed that even in Parliament, there are children and grandchildren and great grandchildren of Holocaust, of Huguenots, of all kind of people in Parliament, and yet you want to bring up a war against migration, people running for their lives, of refugees and asylum seekers, after we have been so many hundreds of years being this. I don't understand, can't comprehend.
It's very salient as well in your collection that you're speaking not just about historic injustices, but the fact that they continue. As Mark Twain says, history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. And that there are those continuing injustices perpetrated by sometimes the people you would least expect
Absolutely.
would be perpetrating them. I urge everyone to read Living by Troubled Waters. It's fabulous, and I'm so glad you've been able to speak to us today and answer our questions. If you want to know anything more about Roy's book, there will be links in the show notes. For now, I'm going to say thank you so much to Roy McFarlane. It is a huge pleasure to be able to continue our poetry conversations in a place where others can hear it. And it's been very generous of you to give us this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. It's been a pleasure being in your company and in the company of all those that are subscribed to the Poetic License. Thank you for having me.